What's up, fellow Polymaths? In this video of the Java Fundamentals tutorial, we'll be going over network programming. Network programming refers to writing programs that execute across multiple devices in which the devices are all connected to each other using a network, both internal and external. Tools needed to achieve this are found in the java.net package. This package allows the developer to implement tools such as sockets, which enable the ability to connect devices together and share data. There are two very important network protocols when it comes to connecting devices. There's TCP, which stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and UDP, which stands for User Diagram Protocol. So here are some important networking terms to be familiar with. IP address is a logical unique number assigned to a node of a network, such as IPv4, which is a 32-bit address. This is the current standard, although it's in the transition phase of being supplanted by the IPv6 address. So you can think of this as four numbers that range from 0 to 255, which are separated by decimals. IPv6 address is a 64-bit address, is the current and eventual future standard, and this is represented by 8 groups of 4 hexadecimal digits, each separated by colons. A MAC address is a media access control address, which is a unique identifier of a network interface card. A network node can have multiple NICs, each with a unique MAC address. Practically every computer that can connect to the internet has a MAC address. A port number uniquely identifies different applications. This acts as a communication endpoint between applications. It is associated with the IP address for communication between two applications. So for example, the port numbers that are typical for communicating through the Tcp protocol is port 80, and the communication for communicating over the HTTP secure protocol, or HTTPS, is 443. Protocols are a set of rules that are followed for communicating between devices or applications. The TCP protocol is a connection-oriented protocol which allows for communication between two applications, which are the sender and the receiver. TCP is typically used over the Internet Protocol, which is referred to as the TCP/IP. It is reliable but very slow compared to the UDP. This allows you, for example, to do a web search over the Internet, or for example, watch this video over the Internet. UDP is a connectionless-based protocol. This allows for packets of data to be transmitted between multiple applications. Unlike TCP, acknowledgement is not sent by the receiver, so it is not reliable but fast, compared to TCP. Socket is an endpoint between two-way communications. So when you think of socket, you can think of like the outlet on your wall that you plug a device in. As mentioned before, sockets are used to communicate between the devices and applications. Sockets can be connection-oriented or connectionless, so TCP or UDP. Socket and server socket classes are used for connection-oriented socket programming. The client must be aware of the IP address of the server and the port number, and vice versa to facilitate communication. So here's a diagram of the socket class. So here we have the client and the server. So for the client has a socket that is used to help facilitate connection, and then the client sends a connection request to the server. So the server listens to that connection request and then eventually accepts that connection request. So then after that, the client and server session begins. And this allows the client to write or read information from the server and vice versa. So after that session has been finished, then the client and the server sockets are closed. The socket and the server socket classes contain various methods. Some methods include the accept method, which waits for an incoming client, retrieving the local port, setting the timeouts, as well as setting the connections, and closing the socket, which removes the connection to the server, as well as freeing up resources. So now that we have some familiarity with networking and how sockets work, let's go into the code and briefly try it out. All right, so here I'm in the main class right now, and one of the first things that we can do is retrieve the IP address as well as our host name. So what we need to do is import the java.net package, and then we'll be able to do just that. All right, here I created some code that allows us to retrieve the IP address as well as the host name. So I'll run this program and I'll explain what's happening. All right, so here we got our result. We have our IP address, which combines both the host name as well as the IP address, as well as the name of the host of the computer. So this 127.0.1.1 represents the local host of the computer. Localhost is usually IP address like 127.0.0.1, and you'll probably get a similar IP address if you try it out on your own setup. Although the name of the host is going to be different based on whatever name that you named your computer. All right, now that we've done that, let's try to do something else, such as getting information from a web page. In this case, we're going to be reading the contents of a web page, which will include all the HTML tags. We're going to do this with a simple page, just so we're not bombarded with a bunch of tags that are very difficult to read. All right, so I commented out the previous code that we made before, and I also added some variables that we're going to be utilizing to grab data from a web page. So here we have our buffered reader and input stream reader that will be used to read data from the web page onto our console. And then we have the URL, which will allow us to download data from the web page. So now that we have this, I'm going to be implementing the code so that we were able to retrieve data from a web page. All right, so here I created the code that allows us to download and retrieve data from a website. So in this case, we're going to be downloading data from wikipedia.org. Hopefully they don't mind us doing this. Of course, we're not going to be doing it repeatedly, so it should be fine. So I'm going to run this, and then I'll be able to explain what's going on. All right, so we have our output. So it looks like we're able to download the web page content from the wikipedia.org main page. So here we are able to see that there's HTML tags that are being used in the Wikipedia page, so it doesn't look very clean. Although there are ways to be able to clean this up, but that's the scope for this specific tutorial. So we do see here that there's some Wikipedia content that's recognizable, such as this download Wikipedia for Android or iOS. We also see how Wikipedia has different types of languages. Like on the main page, when you go to the main Wikipedia site, you'll be able to click on a specific language that you want to see Wikipedia articles on. Now that I've done that, let's go over the code and see what's going on. All right, so I talked about before how we're able to instantiate these variables. So we have the buffer reader and input stream, which will allow us to read input from the website. Our string web page text is going to allow us to output the website contents to the console, and the URL is going to allow us to download the contents from the website. So here in this try catch, which is pretty much required to be able to implement this, we have our URL, and we pass in the wikipedia.org website in the URL constructor. And then after that, for our input stream, we assign that as the URL and calling the openstream method of the URL object. Then once we do that, we take our buffered reader object, and then after use that to input the input stream inside that buffer reader constructor. So then in this while loop, we have our buffered reader, which again contains the contents of that input stream from the URL that we download from the wikipedia.org, and is checking if the next line using the readline method is not null. So if there's any text involved, if there's any data, if it's not null, they won't want to keep cycling through this while loop. So then we assign that buffered reader readline text to that web page text variable. And then after that, we just continually keep to output that until finally we reach a point where the Wikipedia text is not returning any more values. And then after that, we get kicked out of the while loop. And here we have our catch statements where we pretty much throw exceptions if we receive an IO exception. And then after that, we have a finally block where we pretty much want to close the stream because we don't need it anymore. But yeah, this was pretty much just to simply explain how to download data from a web page, or at least one way to download data from a web page. We also have our imports as well, which is pretty much required to utilize those objects. Those are some examples of being able to retrieve your IP address or host name from your local, as well as downloading data from a website. All right, here's our assignment for this topic. Number 1, what is the definition of a socket? Number 2, what are two types of network protocols used to facilitate communication? And what is the difference between them? Number 3, write a simple program that connects to the local host server and outputs the host name and IP address in the command line. If this video was of any value to you, then please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.